Welcome to Hustle and Flow with Heather Hubbard. You're listening to a special bonus episode. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard, and I was a litigator, partner, and practice group leader at an AmLaw 200 firm. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you embrace your ambition without selling your soul? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back. I am your host, Heather Hubbard. We are mixing things up for the next few weeks. I am having interviews of me from other podcasts shared right here on mine. So I get this is totally different than how we normally do it. And you may not have seen this on a podcast before, but so many amazing lawyers and one doctor has interviewed me on their podcasts, which is a very different experience than me interviewing someone else or you just hearing me share my thoughts when I do solo episodes. So I'm really excited to bring these to you in case you haven't heard them before. And I'm really excited about introducing you to these amazing women because I think you're really going to want to start subscribing to and listening to their podcasts as well. Okay, so first up this week, we are resharing episode number 73 from the Resilient Lawyer podcast. And the Resilient Lawyer podcast is hosted by the amazing Jeena. If you are not familiar with her, she really is a wellness and mindfulness expert in the legal field. She is the co-author of The Anxious Lawyer. She is also a regular contributor to the ABA Journal as well as Above the Law. She does workshops for law firms. She does private coaching. She leads retreats. And she's also a partner at JC Law Group, which is a bankruptcy firm in San Francisco. So this is her interview of me. We are not editing it at all. You're going to get it from beginning to end. So it's like a podcast within a podcast. And I am super excited to share this episode with you. Enjoy.
Hello, my friends. Thanks for being with us today on another episode of the Resilient Lawyer podcast. In this episode, I am delighted to have Heather Hubbard, who is the founder and president of All Rise, and she hosts a weekly podcast called Hustle and Flow. And I'm really delighted to say that both of our podcasts made the ABA 100 best list. I'm just so thrilled, and I feel like I'm in such good company. So thanks for that. And she's a former partner and practice group leader at an AmLaw 200 firm. Heather is focused on helping women and minorities rise in the legal profession. She does that through retreats, masterminds, online programs, and full-day strategy sessions. And you can find out more about her work at heatherjoyhubbard.com. Heather, welcome to the show. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so much. I've been following your podcast for so long. It's fun to be interviewed.
Yeah, it really is. And I definitely feel like we now have this little group of amazing women lawyer podcasters. So I am just so happy to be part of this community.
Absolutely.
Let's just start by having you give us a 30-second overview of who you are and what you do.
Sure. I mean, I guess 30 seconds, I kind of feel like I am a rebel rouser. I bring the feminine and the masculine to the table, and it's all in an effort to completely turn the legal industry on its head. So I'm just really here to help attorneys, one attorney at a time, learn to practice law in a way that is authentic and fulfilling to them.
So when you say you want to turn the legal profession on its head, what does that mean to you? Or what are some of the specific tasks or specific things that you're trying to work on?
Sure. I mean, part of it is, and I do come from kind of a big law background, but I think that these issues permeate every part of our industry. And that is that we follow this really, really masculine model. And we know that it's very slow to change. So in some ways, I think we're the most antiquated profession out there. And sometimes what that means is, we think in very black and white terms. We aren't willing to change. We think that you have to kill yourself to be a good lawyer. We think that it's okay to, be stressed out all the time. It's okay to not be nice to other lawyers. And, I just think that there's just this belief that this is the way it's always been. And, I just feel like that is over, and it's time. We're seeing this in a lot of different areas in our society and culture, but I'm here to empower people, attorneys, to how do we break through that glass ceiling? And it looks different for everyone, but it's time for us to shift the culture. It's just no longer acceptable to be the norm. And so that's why I do work with law firms, but I mostly work with individuals, because I'm not here to convince people that things need to change. I'm here to empower those that want the change to figure out how to do that on their own.
Yeah. And I think that's so true. And I definitely feel and know to be true the things that you're talking about is that we are ready for a change as a profession, and it is changing, not as quickly as I would like it to, but I'm also not known for my patience. So yes, I so appreciate the work that you do, and it's just been so great actually to have a community of very strong and powerful women lawyers who are sort of speaking out against the very masculine culture that permeates throughout our profession. And I think that we need balance of both. It's not to say that we want to exclude men, but it's really, you just look at the numbers in AM 100, AM 200 law firms in terms of equity partners and who manages those firms. And, we can just go on and on and on about the ways in which there's still just so much inequality that persists throughout our profession.
Oh, absolutely. I was just going to say, and I definitely, cater to women and underrepresented attorneys, but I don't exclude white men. And I always say, I actually think there's a lot of white men out there that really want a more balanced approach as well. So I think we've got to bring them into the equation so that they too feel empowered to push back against, the patriarchy, or however you want to say it.
Yeah. And I've been having more of these conversations with, and I'm using my air quotation marks here, the white male, middle-aged white male lawyer. And I think there is a yearning to practice in a way that is more aligned with their authentic selves, and to give vocabulary and tools around it. And also, I think that a lot of men are interested in being allies and actually trying to create a more balanced and more inclusive workforce, but they don't really know how to go about doing it. So giving them actually tools and strategies for being an ally, because I think it's actually much more powerful when, it's a group of 10 lawyers sitting around talking about who's going to be promoted to partner. If it's a male lawyer saying, hey, look, everyone we're considering are other white males. And maybe we need to sort of broaden our, our circle, and maybe, there are people that we're not considering that we should be, rather than always having that responsibility land on the woman in that group or the person of color in that group.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, when we talk about balance or being more authentic, I think because of the role that many white men are in, they actually have the opportunity to go ahead and start pushing those boundaries a little bit themselves and basically modeling for others what can be accomplished. So I think that's another great way for them to be allies, is to use their privilege to start pushing for what we all want as a whole in the industry, because I think that's where we can start to have, more momentum and faster, because I too don't have much patience.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really one of the, I don't know, I guess one of the good things about lawyers is that we get stuff done, but also
Yes.
it can kind of cut both ways. So, both you and I have lots of different things in common, but one of them being mindfulness. So I'm curious, how did that journey to mindfulness start? And I'm curious how that sort of helped you in terms of your life and your career.
Sure. So it started when I was practicing law, and it's a bit of a long story, so I'm going to make it super short. But I was doing great in my career, but started to have one personal crisis after another pop up for me, to the point where I just had like this breaking point and knew that something had to change. And I didn't know what that was. But for the first time, I was willing and open to receiving and learning new things. And so as I was exploring that piece of, how do I go through all of these personal issues and deal with these personal issues, one of the things I stumbled upon was mindfulness. And it made the biggest difference for me. And not only did it help me deal with what was going on in my personal life, I realized how reactive I was in my professional life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, oh my goodness. I had no idea how dysfunctional I was, or my brain was at the moment. And when I was able to apply that to my professional life as well, my life got so much easier, right? Nothing externally changed. It was all internal. And people noticed, and they would even be like, what are you doing differently? Like
What's different about you?
And I would say meditation and mindfulness. And then they would look at me like I was an alien, with 3 heads. And that many times they had no more questions. They were like, and okay, she's gone to the dark side. But it was true. It was true. I suddenly, did not have nearly as much stress and anxiety. And, just being so reactive. It's kind of embarrassing to admit how reactive I used to be, but maybe that's the norm. I don't know. But so, yeah, it's had a huge impact on my life. And, I bring that to the table in everything that I do and everything I teach. So, and I think that's part of, even being this rebel rouser, right? Because I'm talking about business strategy, but I'm also doing it in a holistic way. And that can feel very, it's a challenge to the status quo.
Yeah. So often when I talk to people that practice mindfulness, it's kind of hard to have a conversation about mindfulness without talking about meditation. I'm curious, what does your daily, or if you have a regular meditation practice, like what does that look like? And more importantly, how do you find time for it?
So when I started meditating, and by the way, I had tried to meditate on and off over the years, and I was one of those people that said, that does not work for me. I cannot do that. But it was because I never had a good teacher. And I didn't realize how many options there were. To me, meditation was just, trying to turn off my thoughts and just sitting there in silence without, anything going on. But when I then started learning about mindfulness, I started following UCLA. It's Mindfulness at the Hammer. And it's a podcast now, but it used to be on iTunes U. And so it was free. And they're like lectures and they're meditations, guided meditations, and they last about, on average, 30 minutes. Some are an hour, some are a little bit shorter. And so every morning, because keep in mind, when I was going through all of these personal issues, I had a lot of pain, right? Immediate pain that I wanted solved. I wanted it to be, eased and released. So in the morning before I would go to work, I would listen to, every single morning, I would listen to one of their lectures and guided meditations. And I found that guided meditations work so much better for me than anything else. And I still use a few different techniques, just kind of depending on my intention. But if I'm ever busy and distracted and think I can't quiet my mind, I personally do better with a guided meditation where I'm actively focusing on a concept or a storyline. So that's how, I started it. Now, and, one of the other things I did, and I always encourage people to do, we all have 5 minutes at lunch, and we generally get crazy by lunch. So it's easy to just reset. I used to use guided meditations on that too. Now I have found that I prefer to do my meditation in the afternoon. So I generally do it once I get tired, which is generally around 2 or 3 p.m. for me. And I now have on my iPad, and by the way, I work from my home. So I have this area set up just for meditation, and I have my iPad there, and it's already got, my favorite playlists, whether it's just music and I'm going to meditate with that music, or whether it's guided meditations, or whether they're just, for me, spiritual, inspiring lectures, which in my mind is a bit of a mindfulness practice in and of itself, because I'm focused just on that and, trying to be mindful and intentional. But that's kind of the way I approach it now. Now, when I get really busy, I tend to want to skip that time. And I'm not.
Right. It's like when you most need it is when you least want to do it.
Yes. So I try to force myself to do it no matter what. And what I say when I'm like super busy is, you've got 10 minutes. Like, there is nothing that you're going to accomplish in 10 minutes, right, that can't be accomplished later. And the truth is, when I get in that crazy busy zone, I lose perspective. I forget what's real and what's not real. And so, I create a story in my head that all of these things have to get done, or, the world's going to, stop spinning. And I'll come up for that 10 minutes that I knew I didn't have. And it generally turns into longer, because within the first 5 minutes, I realize I'm spinning wheels and I'm creating stories that are not real.
Yeah. Right.
I don't have to get everything done.
Yeah, so true. Sometimes when I talk to lawyers about mindfulness or meditation, they have this sense like, you know what, I have so many things on my to-do list, and I literally just cannot add a single thing to my to-do list. Or, it could be just any other thing, like practicing self-care, going for a walk, or whatever those activities might be that really sort of nourishes and recharges us. I know when you're working with those lawyers, what kind of tips or strategies, or are there sort of helpful tools, or just something that you found to be helpful, either for yourself or working with clients?
Well, 2 things. One, I think research shows that when our brain is fried, we are not as efficient or as productive. So it is a lie to think that we don't have extra time, because if you actually spend the extra time on the self-care or the mindfulness or the meditation, it actually helps you have a sharper mind when you are working. Mm-hmm. And so I know that's counterintuitive, but you don't need as much time as you think if you have a clear, sharp mind. Yeah. And you and I know from the research, mindfulness, and especially the mindful meditation practice, it changes the brain. It changes how you respond and react. You're going to be able to perform at better levels if you're taking the time to take care of yourself. The other part of that is lawyers are terrible at time management. And when I'm talking about time management, it's generally in the form, and this is related to mindfulness, it's in the form of they are so reactive that they don't know the difference between priorities and what has to get done versus just people pleasing and putting out fires all day long. Right. So I generally try to help people with that first and foremost, because the vast majority of what they're doing, they don't have to do. Either it can work itself out on its own, it can be delegated. So many of us just have open door policies. We pick up the phone anytime it rings. We, have our email up, so we see everything that comes in. We're multitasking. And we completely lose track of our days because people are just, we're there for them. And that has to shift. that has to shift. And, you'll find that you don't actually have to do all those things for all those people, and you won't lose clients. And if you do lose any, it's probably the ones that you didn't need anyway.
Yeah. Well, when you say that has to shift, what does that shift look like? If sort of going from this multitasking, constantly frazzled state to, right, what's the there?
Yeah, so part of it is that you decide that you're in control of your schedule. And one, you're not gonna show up and say, I'm a lawyer, I have no control of my schedule. So that's step number one, is just recognizing that that's not even true. Maybe that's a story you were telling yourself, and you're going to not follow what everyone says is the norm. You're going to say, well, what if it's different? Yeah. What if I could do this differently? And so one of the steps is to start to just notice what your day looks like. Do you have your email up all the time? And if you do, can you shut it off, not let it pop up? Mm-hmm. Can you just respond to emails once an hour? We'll start with baby steps. You can only pull your email up for the last 10 minutes of an hour. Mm-hmm. And it's going to completely stress you out because you told yourself, right, that if you don't respond immediately, it's an issue. But what I say to that is, well, what about when you're in a deposition? Or what about when you're in trial? Or what about when you're with a client? You don't answer your emails then. Right. You don't answer phone calls then, right? And no one fires you. It's just because you're sitting at your desk and you're available that you assume people know that. Right. So that's one piece. Another is, and I actually have a podcast episode coming out soon called Scheduling Secrets, and I go through some of this. But you have to be able to identify if something's a priority or if it can be delegated. And I generally use what I call the priority matrix on that. It is just training people to start to identify, where things fall and treating them accordingly. So it's really about just getting out of the firefighting mode. And for people that say they love to firefight, I'm always like, okay, you can be an ER doctor, but you have to have a support team that looks like an ER room. You can't be doing all the work. Right? ER doctors don't do all the work. They're just troubleshooting. So where are your residents? Where are your nurses? Where are, the other treating physicians that are following through? Because you can't do both. You can't be, spotting all the issues and doing all the work. And I think that's where attorneys get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Well, and also just the way that our profession is structured, right? This idea that, we literally trade 0.1 hour of our time for a certain dollar amount. So there's this constant pressure to just bill that extra 1 hour, regardless of the quality of those hours that we're billing. So I think it's really just sort of ripe for all of these dysfunctions that we're talking about. And, I often think, if they can just get rid of the billable hour, we would solve so many of these issues. But somehow as a profession, I don't think we've hacked that problem yet. And I've been practicing for 15 years. And I remember they were talking about it when I graduated from law school in 2003. So yeah, do you think, how much of it do you think has to do with the billable hour, right? Just so many of the dysfunctions that we experience as lawyers. And, when you talk about sort of turning the legal profession on its head and shifting the paradigm, is that part of the conversation that you're having?
Absolutely. The billable hour, anytime you're swapping just time for money anyway, it's not the best business model. But the problem with there are a lot of problems with the billable hour, but one of the things is if you are being efficient and really have the client's, goals in mind, you really shouldn't be getting compensated based on how long it takes you because, you're basically being incentivized. Yeah, you're being incentivized to spend way too long on these matters. And if you ever hear people talk about attorneys, they're like, they can't give me any predictability. My bill changes every month. I never know what's going on. And then attorneys say, well, we can't predict that. That's just the nature of our business. And I'm calling BS on that because if you go look at any other business, they figure it out, right? They don't get to have that excuse. They have to track the data. They have to make best guesses. And yeah, they lose sometimes. lawyers are funny. Like, we want guarantees. Like, I never want to lose any money. If I've spent this much amount, time, I want, and it's like, well, what kind of business runs that way? And it's like, okay, well, you can have that safety and security, but you're losing out on the upside by not being innovative and thinking of your firm like a business. I mean, that's honestly the thing that probably drives me more crazy than the billable hour is how firms do not run like businesses. They don't think like businesses. And I think they're just leaving so much money on the table by doing that, and they're losing on the balance piece. But, I do find a lot of women, and this is a bit stereotypical, but I do find it to be true. A lot of women, because they're juggling so many things, they actually want to be efficient. They're super efficient in the way that they approach things. And a lot of them are really great at organization. And so they can just knock things out. But the problem is, at the end of the day, they still have to bill a certain amount of hours if they're in a firm that requires that. So they're not actually being valued for being more efficient. And they can't find the balance they're looking for, because at the end of the day, the firm only cares about how many hours they build. So I totally agree with you that it's not a great system.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with a partner at a law firm recently, and he goes, I think if I were to redesign the system, I would actually do my billable hour depending on the time of the day. So he's like, so like my hourly rate from like 7 a.m. to like 10 a.m. would be like $1,000, right? And then it was sort of tiered down from there. And then he said, after 3 o'clock, I should be paying them to do any work. And I thought,
Right.
that actually makes sense, right? Because why is it that you bill the exact same amount of money, whether you are doing it sort of at your peak time when you're in that state of flow at, let's say, 7 or 8 a.m., if that's sort of your peak time for you, versus at like 4 when you're sort of doing, your worst work. So there's
Right.
so many inefficiencies, and it really drives me crazy how we just think about work. And and I think that's also one of the reasons why so many women are just leaving the big law practice, because they're just like, no, this is not an efficient way to do work, and I'd rather go in-house or do something completely different. So I really feel like addressing some of these underlying issues is going to be key in terms of like retention issues too.
Absolutely. So many firms blame, women leaving on children. And I just don't buy that. I don't believe that. It's certainly not really what comes up for the women that I'm working with, or when I talk to women in general, or firms where, they're very aware of what's going on with retention issues. It's that they're so frustrated with the system, and that firms won't work with them to create an environment that's just better overall. That's the issue. And, they say, well, we've got flex schedules, or we do this or we do that. And it's like, yeah, but you're still trying to create this structure where you value them less and you see them as less than. And that doesn't work. I mean, you've got high achievers that want to be seen as doing great work and bringing value to the table. And so as soon as you start making these trade-offs, it's like, well, at this point, you're just trying to make concessions, and that's how you see them, that's how you view them, and that's how you compensate them, as opposed to saying maybe they just have a better way of doing things. And if we allow them to come to the table from the perspective of, we're going to try to do this for everyone and figure out what's the best way to approach this, for clients and attorneys, and, I swear they could actually make more money and all be happier. I don't think it's a trade-off. I just think they're terrible at business.
Yeah. And I think the billable hour is like something that no one actually really likes, right? Like the clients don't like it, the attorneys don't like it. So it just really perplexes me why it is that we are still struggling with this.
Yeah, it's kind of like changing the time. I've said that we could probably start to bring the country together if we all agreed just to get rid of the whole, daylight savings time snafu every fall and spring. I think we can all get on board.
Yeah, the daylight savings time drives me crazy too. Well, so, what are some of the mindsets that you bring into your training and programs? I mean, you really talk a lot about sort of changing your mindset, because of course that's sort of the only thing you can control is your responses and your mindset and how you're thinking and viewing things. And I know you talk a lot about that on your podcast. So when you're working with lawyers, what does that look like?
Yeah. So that is the first thing that I start with no matter what I'm doing. So for example, I have a career clarity online program, and that's the very first thing we talk about. We talk about mindset, and we talk about how having the right mindset is going to impact the results you get on the program you're having, like as you go through the program. And as you're, answering the questions and thinking about what you want. And when my retreat starts, that is our very first session. We talk about mindset, and we talk about stories and, the neuroscience and mindfulness aspects. For example, I did a presentation yesterday. It was only 55 minutes, and it was about goal setting. But the very first 5 minutes, we talked about mindset. So for me, I'm not going to start a conversation, start a program, start a coaching, anything without talking about mindset first, because without it, you're not going to get the results that you want. And I'm a highly competitive person. I am super results oriented. So I always say, I am doing this for you. And I am, because I want you to get the most out of this. And you have to start with mindset. And, people push back. They're like, oh, do we have to do this? And I'm like, yeah, we do.
Well, it takes a lot of work to look inside, because I think it's so much easier to just be like, no. Like, your job is to help me fix everybody else, which is what I often get when I'm teaching mindfulness to lawyers. It's like, no, you're supposed to help me how to get that attorney to behave better, or you're supposed to teach me so that I can come back, have the perfect response to every annoying thing that somebody else says. And it's like, no, sorry.
Well, it's interesting on the career clarity one, on that program. People are like, hey, can we jump straight to what are my options? And I'm like, no, we've got a lot more work to do before we get there. And they're like, oh gosh. I'm like, this is going to matter. And by the end, they're like, I am so glad that you forced me to do that work, because I would have had a totally different answer had I not done it. And the thing is, it would have been wrong, right? It would have been under this false pretense, because you get the answer that you think is right. But the truth is it's not, because it's not really at the core of what you want. It's just what you think is the safe answer.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. I mean, like everything you're saying is so true, just in my own experience and just in my own life, and also having worked with lawyers.
I mean, I think your listeners probably know this already, but if you are the kind of person that tends to say that you can't meditate, I highly encourage you to keep trying. I highly encourage you to keep trying, because it's totally doable once you find what works for you.
Yeah. And it's really just about showing up, right? I mean, it's show up every day and do it really, really badly. Give yourself the permission to do it as badly as you possibly can. It's there's such this expectation that I have to do it perfectly. And if I can't do it perfectly, then I might well as not try. And I find that actually bleeds into so many different arenas for lawyers. It's just we're sort of saturated in that thinking. It's I'm not even going to try unless I know I can do it perfectly.
We are such perfectionists, and I am convinced that that is my lifelong lesson. When I am 98 years old, I will still be working on that one. So yeah. And I think that's a pretty common trait for lawyers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's such an important thing to just remember, is that this is not something any one of us are going to perfect today or tomorrow, and that it's really a lifelong journey, and really taking just a kinder stance towards yourself. It's so key. And then I think we're sort of really trained, hyper-focused, and sort of motivating ourselves with the whip, and we don't often realize hey, there's this other method that typically works better. So let's try that.
Yeah, I mean, the non-judgmental piece is so important. And often I find when people are learning about mindfulness for the first time, especially attorneys, the non-judgmental piece is the biggest one for them, you know, because we are so judgmental of ourselves and the way we're doing a meditation or anything else. Yeah.
Thoughts or suggestions on how to sort of quiet that inner critic, that sort of naysayer, or the saboteur that's saying like you're doing this poorly, and that you might as well just not try, or like whatever that inner critic might be saying, and doing the practice despite those narratives.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One of the things I encourage lawyers to do is to actually step in and be an advocate. We're really good at being advocates for others. And so, I always say, notice first and foremost that voice is not real. It is just a voice. It is not you. And there can be another voice that's louder, and you can be in control of that voice. And I want you to look at yourself, right? And look at that voice and say, okay, if that's my opposing counsel, if I have to go to the judge, what is my argument in defense of this person, myself, right? And sometimes it's a lot easier to look at it from that perspective because you're not personally attached, and you can step away and you can see, things a little bit more objectively. And so I'm like, are you going to lose this argument or not? And then attorneys get pretty good about being able to make the argument, but I ask them to write it down so that, I just think that you feel it more, and sometimes we need to go back and look at it to remind ourselves, okay, objectively, what did my lawyer have to say on my behalf?
Yeah. Right. I love that practice. I am totally going to steal that one from you. I love that.
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I often think about it just in the context of, working with thinking errors, right? And that like not every thought is fact, just because your brain somehow created this set of thoughts does not mean it's based on reality or that it's true. But yeah, I love that idea of just like, what would you do if you were defending yourself against a jury?
And some people, right, like it's like, well, okay, if someone was saying that about your child, or if someone was saying that about your best friend, what would be your response? So sometimes I just think we have to either, get into that parental authoritative lawyer role to take care of ourselves. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I so agree with you. Heather, thank you so much for being with me this morning. I really appreciate it. For the listeners out there that are interested in learning more about your work or interested in working with you, what are some of the best ways to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so the best way is just to go to my website. It's heatherjoyhubbard.com. And you can kind of see what I do offer, excuse me. And I have a contact me form on there. So that is the best way to reach out.
Perfect. And Heather, my final question is always this. The name of this podcast is called The Resilient Lawyer. What does it mean to be a resilient lawyer to you?
To me, being a resilient lawyer is having the courage to stand in what you know to be true. So it's really about looking at yourself, what you want, where you want to go, and blocking out the rest. Not letting society, not letting the legal industry tell you what you should be doing or how you should be doing it, but being resilient enough to say, you know what, I can make these decisions on my own and I can thrive on my own. So that's really what a resilient lawyer looks like to me.
Heather, thank you so much for taking a little bit of time out of your very busy day to share your wisdom and knowledge with me and the audience. I so appreciate it.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that interview and this special bonus episode. If you want to learn more about Jeena, you can visit jeenacho.com and definitely check out and subscribe to her podcast, The Resilient Lawyer. We will have links to both her website and her podcast in today's show notes. So you can just click on those links within your podcast app or on our show notes page at hustleandflowpodcast.com. lifeandlawplanner.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back next week with another interview. I am super excited to announce that the Life and Law Planner is officially here. It is more than just a calendar. It is a full planning system. If you want to take back your days, your weeks, your months, and your year, order your planner now. It will completely change your life and help you accomplish your biggest goals. There's only a limited quantity available, so go to lifeandlawplanner.com and order yours today.